So today we continue our series in the Sermon on the Mount. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 6, verses 16 through 18. So if you've got a Bible or a YouVersion app, I encourage you to turn there so you can follow along, make underlines and highlights and different notes. And it's one of those messages that to preach it in the American church, in the American context, is going to be one that most people haven't heard a sermon on this topic, and most people don't want to hear a sermon on this topic. Today we're going to talk about fasting. That means you're not going to eat food for a certain period of time on purpose, not because you forgot your lunch or your credit card and you can't buy something. And fasting is abstaining from something in order to grow in your relationship with God. Now, there were actually and you look at church history, 150-year time period, from the 1800s to the mid-1900s, where nobody wrote about fasting. Because it's not something you talk about in the American church or in American culture. Because we are used to an abundance, and fasting is the denial of that. In fact, I was reminded of a movie clip that I have seen years ago now. And it's one of those clips that, like when you watch a movie with your kids, and there's this little line in there, or this little part in there, and you're like, oh my goodness. As a kid, you're not going to get how profound that is, but as an adult, it clicks in your head. And so what I want you to do is take a look at this clip and see if you can pick up what's being said.
Just get the food and go. Really, do they have it or not?
Didn't you see it? It was in the box. They've always got food with them. We eat to live. These guys live to eat. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The human mouth is called a pie hole. The human being is called a couch potato. That is the device to summon food. That is one of the many voices of food. That is the portal for the passing of the food. That is one of the many food transportation vehicles. Humans bring the food, take the food, ship the food, they drive the food, they wear the food. That gets the food hot. That keeps the food cold. That, I'm not sure what that is. What do you know? Food! That is the altar where they worship. Food. That's what they eat when they've eaten too much food. That gets rid of the guilt so they can eat more food. Food! 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 So, you think they have enough? Well, they don't. For humans, enough is never enough. And what do they do with the stuff they don't eat? They put it in gleaming silver cans just for us. Dig in! Good, isn't it?
Oh, wow.
We eat to live. These guys live to eat. That everything about who we are as people, it's about comfort. And when we eat food, it's not because we need to eat that food most of the time. It's like, I like the way this tastes. Is it good for me? No, but doggone it, it tastes good. I'm going to keep putting this stuff in my body, not because my body needs this, because this isn't really good for me, but because whenever I put it into my mouth, my taste buds have such a pleasurable sensation that I'm going to do what is probably not good for me because of how good it feels. So here's the thing about it, is that Jesus teaches on fasting. And in the sermon, we're going to talk about 3 verses today, and you're going to be like, that's it? That's all he says about fasting? It's because the Jewish culture, they had a rhythm of fasting. In the early church, Jesus fasted. Look in the book of Acts, the early apostles, they fasted. It was just a normal part of their relationship with God. So Jesus doesn't have to unpack it a lot. It's just something that they know to do and that they do on a regular basis. But for us, we're like, Jesus, we need a little bit more because 1, we're not convinced that this is a good idea. 2, some of you were taught and believe that fasting is really bad for you. Dude, if we say no to food or we skip meals or we go a day or a couple days without eating, can our bodies even recover? Which is funny because now scientific literature is like, you should eat less and you should do intermittent fasting throughout the day, or every once in a while, 2 or 3 days of fasting is really good for your body. And so what we need to realize is when we talk about fasting, we're talking about staying away from food, not because it has good health benefits. It does. But that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because we want to get closer to God. In fact, our working definition for what we're going to be talking about today is fasting is denying ourselves of food or anything else that would help us direct our focus and attention on God. And if the early church and the Jews throughout their history, if they fasted from food, how much more do we need to? Because their relationship with food was different than ours. We're kind of obsessed with it, and we go out of our way to make things as tasty and unhealthy as possible. And I think we have much more dependence on food and taste and all of that than what they did back in the day. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to unpack Jesus' teaching, Matthew 6, verses 16 through 18. And then we're going to talk about different ways that you can fast, and then we're going to talk about why you can fast, and I'm going to get you out of here so you can go to lunch. Okay? That's how we're going to roll things today. So, as we jump in, though, I want to remind you about kind of our growth principle. Like, well, what are the practices of a growing Christian? What is it we're supposed to do as Jesus people? Well, we're supposed to give generously. We're supposed to run in tribes. That's Sunday school stuff, small group stuff. We're supposed to open doors. That's serving. We're supposed to win souls. That's evangelism. We tackle sin, and then we hunger for God. That in order for you to grow in your relationship with Him, you have to desire God above everything else. If you're going to get sin out of your life, you have to desire God more than you desire sin. If you're going to give generously, whether you're talking about time, energy, or money, you have to value God over your possessions and over your stuff. That hungering for God and your relationship with Him is really where all of this starts. And it makes me think of different things, like in the Old Testament, book of Psalms, it's like, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs after you, O Lord. Or when Jesus tells us to hunger and thirst for righteousness. If we do that, we're going to be filled. I think of Jesus when He was being tempted in Matthew 4. It says, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. And so we have a need for something, food. Like, you need food to survive. But you need God even more than what you could ever imagine. And you need God more than you need food. So what fasting does is it creates a spiritual appetite in our hearts and in our souls that puts us before God and helps us grow in our relationship with Him. The Puritans throughout church history have called fasting soul fattening. You might lose weight physically depending on how much you fast, but spiritually, you'll be so much stronger than you would ever imagine. So, Jesus, Matthew chapter 6, He begins with, when you fast. And this is how He starts the topic on giving and prayer as well. Hey, when you give, and when you pray. And now He says, and when you fast, just kind of assuming that's going to be a part of our lives and our rhythm. Now, I want you to note that Jesus isn't saying you have to fast. This is something you have to do. That's legalism. And that's like, okay, I got a list of things that I've got to do. I think Jesus is saying, hey, you've got an opportunity to grow closer with God by abstaining from food, which is kind of weird. We're going to talk about that at the end. Like, well, why is that the thing that helps us grow in our relationship with God? It seems strange. But here's a great opportunity to grow in your relationship with God. So when you fast and when you do things to grow in your relationship with God, make sure you have this mindset, just like when you give and when you pray. And all of this is in the context of Matthew chapter 6, verse 5, when He says, be careful not to do your acts of righteousness before men to be seen by them, because if you do, you'll receive no reward from your Father in heaven. So He goes on to say, when you fast, don't look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. You ever see a kid fall down and it wasn't that bad of a fall, and they jump up and they're like, oh. And what do they want? They want sympathy. They want somebody to notice. Now, if dad notices, he says the same thing 100% of the time, every time. You're fine. Walk it off. I mean, a kid can have a bone sticking out of his thigh. It's like, you're fine. We'll duct tape that thing back in there. You'll walk. It's fine. My mom was like that too. Like, she would, like, I'd fall down, I'd be hurt. She'd just come up with a handful of dirt. Here you go. Rub it on the boo-boo. Rub it on what's hurt. No sympathy in the Junkins household. Grandma's, on the other hand, other side of the equation. It's like, fall down. It's like they've got 911 on the phone. Okay, so he was running at a speed of 2.5 miles an hour. He fell in the grass. I see red on his knee. Send someone quickly. I'm pointing at my mother-in-law on that one. So, that's what grandmas do. But little Timmy or little Billy, they fall, and they want people to notice them. And they want people to go, oh, my goodness, are you hurt? Are you okay? And pat their little bags. And, do you want some juice? How about a cookie to make you feel better? Now, I would say that's limited to, to little kids, but have you watched professional sports recently? These guys do the exact same thing. And I'm like, you get paid millions of dollars to do what you do, and you get hurt, and you're limping around, the trainer comes out, and they're just like, all the stuff. And then 2 minutes later, you're at full speed playing once again. I'm like, what happened to the days when Bob Gibson got hit by a line drive, broke his leg, and tried to keep pitching? Where were those men at now? Anyways, I digress. Bottom line is, don't cater your kids when they fall down and get a boo-boo. Get them in trouble every time they get hurt, and they'll stop getting hurt. I guarantee you that. But anyways, on to fasting. Here's what guys were doing in Jesus' day. They were doing the exact same thing. They wanted attention. So they'd go around, they'd disfigure their faces. Doug, you okay? What's wrong? I'm fasting. It's okay. I'm good. I'm just getting closer with the Lord. And you're like, how long have you been fasting for? It's been 35 minutes. It's awful. My goodness. But you do this whole show and this whole charade so that people see you and go, oh, wow, look how holy this guy is. Or maybe you get a little lightheaded. Oh, my goodness. You okay, Doug? Yeah, I'm just fasting. It's okay. I'm good. Oh, he fasts. Who even heard of such a thing? And when people go, wow, Jesus is like, that's what you want. That's all you're going to get. Now, in his day, guys would they'd mess up their beards and their hair, and they would just kind of walk around. It almost looked like they were injured or that they had been up all night, and they wanted to make this physical appearance. And that just let people know they were fasting. The Pharisees, they would fast 2 days a week. And different groups that Jesus would interact with, they had this constant rhythm of fasting. And it was legalistic. And it wasn't to grow in your relationship with God. It was, I got to do this because I'm supposed to, but then I want people to say, wow, look at this guy. Look at how awesome he is. And Jesus says, when that happens, they've received their reward in full. But when you fast, put oil on your head, wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father, who sees what is done in secret, he will reward you. And you think about the reward and what you get is a closer proximity to God. You deepen your relationship with him by setting aside something that is very good and something, in the case of food, that you absolutely need to live. You're going to set that aside and say, I need this, but I need God more than I need this. And so I'm going to put myself before the throne of God to grow in relationship with him so that I can have in life what I was created for and what is absolutely and totally the best. The reward for fasting and all the spiritual disciplines is growing closer to God and deepening our relationship with him. And once you start to experience that, there is nothing better in your life than growing closer in a deeper relationship with God. And the thing that makes fasting spiritual and significant is that during that time, you're putting him first. You're doing it for him and for your relationship with him. Like there are health experts and health influencers and people on Instagram and TikTok that will intermittently fast and do different things strategically for physical health. They're not growing closer with God, though they may be skipping the same amount of meals as someone who's fasting. So the point is, these are things that we can do to put ourselves before God so that he can do in our lives what only he can do. Fasting is only significant because God says, do this and you'll grow in your relationship with me. And he uses that as an avenue so that we can grow. Now, when you think about fasting and different ways to fast, like I said, you can fast from social media. You can fast from TV. You can say, hey, I'm not going to listen to secular music for this season. I'm just going to listen to Christian music, which will change your mindset, your outlook, and your demeanor. In fact, if some of you said, I'm going to fast from social media and TV, and I'm just going to use that time to pray and read my Bible, you'd come out like Moses. Your face would be glowing because of how much time you spend on that normally, and now it all gets transferred to God. You'd read your Bible 8 times before Easter Sunday, and that's a week away. Because we spend so much time on that junk. So that's maybe not the best example, because I don't like food is good, you need it to survive. Social media is probably bad, and it's taking you further away from God. So fasting from social media is more like tackling sin as opposed to fasting from something. But you get my point. You can fast from a lot of things that aren't food to help put you into closer proximity with God and help you grow in your relationship with Him. But then when you think about food, there are different ways to do it. So you may say, hey, I'm going to not eat solid food, but I'll still drink orange juice, different things like that. Because as you start out, you don't want to start out at a dead sprint. You got to get warmed up. There's some training that's involved to kind of put yourself in a good spot. You can just skip a meal as opposed to a whole day of eating. You can skip a certain type of food. So like our Catholic friends during Lent, they'll say, hey, I'm going to give up chocolate, or I'm going to give up other forms of candy. If you're really spiritual, you'd say, I'm going to give up coffee for Lent. And if you're able to do that, if the Lord provides you the strength to say no to coffee for 40 days, you say, I'm going to set that aside, and whenever I have a craving or a desire to do that, I'm going to just simply pray, and I'm going to talk to God. And if I did that with coffee, I'd talk to God an awful lot during whatever season I'd be fasting for that. In addition to that, you can say, I'm going to do a complete and total fast. That is not only I'm not going to eat, I'm also not going to drink. Now, I would say that that's not recommended. If you're fasting from food and you're going longer than a couple meals, you need to make sure that you are well hydrated, just from a health standpoint. But there are seasons in life for a short duration, and there are times in the Bible where people will do a complete fast. They don't eat or drink anything for a set amount of time. I had a professor in college who, his brother, who was also a pastor, they're both pastors, and they taught at the college as adjunct professors. The brother fasted for 40 days, which is right at the brink of human limit. So he fasted for 40 days, and he had a doctor who he was close with, and he was constantly there making sure that, and I'm not trying to be funny, he wasn't going to die. Because you fast for 40 days, wicked dangerous. Don't just do it casually. Anytime you go over probably 3 or 4 days, you got to start being mindful that things are going to break down in your body at that point. You fast for 2 days, there's no issue, and you can break your fast however you want. I'd recommend not like buffalo wings or something like that. But the longer you go, the more careful you have to be when you introduce food into your system. And I wouldn't make a bet with somebody. I bet you I could fast for 40 days. That's not the reason you want to get into it. You have to feel called and led by God to do something that extreme. Now, there are different reasons that you can be called to fast. You can feel led to fast, and there are different reasons that we see in Scripture. In Nehemiah 9, the people used fasting for repentance. In the book of Esther, they used it to mourn or to grieve. In Psalm 35, fasting is used to intercede or to pray for people and speak to God on behalf of people. In Isaiah, it's to overcome sin. There was some addiction. There was a bondage of sin that had gripped people, and they were fasting to release themselves from that. In the book of Ezra, to seek answers. That's why they fasted. And then in the book of Acts, they fasted to appoint leaders. And that's when they sent Paul and Barnabas on their missionary journey. They were fasting and praying and worshiping God and studying His Word, and the Spirit led them to appoint Paul and Barnabas. So there's something that happens when we fast that allows us to hear God more clearly. The thing I don't want you to hear is that if I really want what I want from, if I really want to get what I want from God, I've got to do things like fasting, because that's my way of shouting my prayers to God. And that's what's going to help Him to hear me and bless me and give me what it is that I want. And so if I fast, that's like a kid who threatens he's going to run away if he doesn't get what he wants. You ever do that as a kid? My brother did it. My parents packed his bags for him. They're like, okay, here you go. And they packed all this stuff, and they said, now, I'll tell you what, if you start walking that way, if you go that way, you might eventually get to grandma's. If you go that way, you're going to walk, and I was crying. I'm like, you can't let him leave. I was 8 years old. And they knew what they were doing, right? So like sometimes people think if I fast, that lets God know I'm serious. I'm going to like hold him hostage. God, I won't eat until I get what I want. That's not what fasting is. What fasting does is it's not your way of shouting at God. It's your way of quieting everything else down so you can hear him when he speaks to you, so you can get closer with him. You know, I think about your relationship with your kids, and sometimes you talk to your kids and there's TVs on, or their heads are into their phone. Maybe people are talking to you and you're looking at something and you're not paying attention. Like fasting is our way of like setting all that stuff aside so we can hear God. I think about my kids. A lot of times I'm on the main floor, they're upstairs, they're getting ready, and they want to know if they can wear shorts. They always want to wear shorts. And it's like, there's snow on the ground, the wind chill is negative something, I don't want DCFS visiting me because I'm somehow like not clothing you adequately. So it's like, can we wear shorts? It's like, it's 22. I can wear the blue ones? No, like come down here. You can't wear shorts. So when they come down, I don't have to shout anymore. In fact, I'm quieter than I was 30 seconds ago. But they're able to hear me. Why? Because they're in front of me now. What fasting does is it puts us in front of God, able to hear him more clearly and more directly, able to be guided by him in certain situations, and to feel his presence in more tangible ways. So if you've never fasted before, I want to encourage you to fast in some way, shape, or form. And if like, and people have different health issues, blood sugar, all that stuff. So if it can't be food for you, there's a lot of mileage you can get out of fasting from your phone or TV or whatever. And setting aside that time, like, I'm going to set this aside. God, I'm going to read my Bible and pray, and I want to connect with you. That's what I want more than anything else. What's going on with The Bachelor? Is that even still a show? Is that a show? I was trying to trick one of you, be like, oh yeah, it's a show. It's a good show. But like, you know, whatever's going on with this show or whoever wins the national I'm going to set aside my desire to watch TV and always be in the know about all this stuff. Maybe fast from the news. Your spirit will just be joyful automatically from that. You're going to set it aside, and now I'm just going to put myself before God. Because God, you're more important to me than food. You're more important to me than what so-and-so had for dinner. I could check that on social media. You're more important to me than whatever the latest song is. God, you're more important to me than anything. So I'm going to set aside this, not because it's evil, not because it's bad, but because I just want you more than anything. Let me tell you, you start to do that, and that becomes a rhythm of who you are. It will bring about a benefit and a blessing. I don't necessarily know why. You just have to start and learn by going through it. Now, I will say, when you start, don't expect like some moment where like you hear angels humming in your ears and then there's like a bright light and you're like, oh, this is what Doug was talking about. This is awesome. When you start, if you've never done it before, depending on how long you choose to go, you may go, I'm just hangry. I feel like this is counterproductive. And I don't feel closer with God. I feel like ripping off everybody's head who comes into my presence and tries to talk to me. And that's a real thing, okay? It's because we've conditioned ourselves to, caffeine and sugar and all the stuff that we get addicted to. But if you give it time, not only like if you go 3 or 4 days of fasting, but like if you every week say, I'm going to fast, I'm going to skip 2 meals every week on the same day. As you start to develop that pattern, you will start to think differently, see things differently, and the experience will be much, much different with the fast. And I can look at my prayer journal from like different points in my life where I did different fasts and different durations, and I will say that like the way I prayed and the way I felt in terms of my relationship with God and how connected I felt with Him is different. It reads differently. My prayers sounded different. And there was something going on that was on a deeper level than kind of just your normal ebb and flow of prayer and Bible study. And if God said, instead of fasting, if there's a season where you stand on one leg while you pray, I would do that. I just want to grow closer with God. I don't care what I have to give up. I don't care what I have to say no to. I don't care how much it may make me feel uncomfortable or whatever. I just want to grow closer with God. I'm willing to do anything for that. Now, as you think about fasting too, some of you are rule followers, some of you are legalists. And so you're like, okay, yeah, give me something else to do, and I'll write that down, and I'll make sure that I prioritize that, and then it can actually have the opposite effect if you're really good at stuff like that. And you could just be a really disciplined person naturally, and it's easy for you to eat what you're supposed to eat and exercise when you're supposed to do it and all that stuff. And it'll produce a holier-than-thou mindset. You know, Doug's talking about starting small. I mean, I could fast any amount of time, and this is easy, and what's wrong with people? Why can't they do this? God, why can't everybody be like me? You're probably so thankful that I'm here, and I can, I'll skip meals. And like, you may not actually say that, but that's kind of what you think. You got to be careful about that as well. But what you have to make up your mind to is, I want God more than anything. And I don't know what that looks like, and I don't know how that plays out, but I want God more than anything. God is more precious to me. My relationship with Jesus is more precious to me than anything. So if I can do something like this, and it'll help me grow closer in my relationship with God, then why wouldn't I do it? And so for us, as Jesus people, my challenge to you is to figure out what this can look like in your life. You do need to start small. If you've never done it before, like skip a meal or 2 meals. If you decide to fast for a day or two, maybe allow like orange juice or some type of liquid to not only hydrate you, but give you sustenance. You got to be smart about it. You can Google stuff. You can look up stuff that can give you a way of thinking about it and a way of prioritizing it. You could also just do the social media thing, but like fast from something for a certain period of time and put it on paper before you decide to do it, so that you're like, I might fast today, and then you find out, like at work, someone's bringing in ribs. You're like, I'll start tomorrow. Like, God wouldn't want me to, fast today, not with ribs here. So like, you set it, and like once you set it, then you say, God, I'm going to put you first. I'm going to do my best to be obedient to this because I love you more than anything, and I want to be closer to you more than anything. That's my challenge to you. So prioritize it. Be Spirit-led through the thought process and as you pray about it, and then execute it. And then see what God does through those different moments to use these little things, which seem so trivial and strange, to help you grow closer in your relationship with Him.